Good afternoon. My name's Willetta, and I want to talk a little bit about my heart transplant. I got a heart transplant in July 2022. It's been 4 years. Um, wow. My story begins when I came in, and of course, I believe I was at 6% at that time. I was just having a hard time breathing. I was moving around. I was furniture walking, chair walking. I am a minister, so I was able to, do my ministry, but yet it was hard. I could just do what I needed to do and sit down. Everything was a sit down or lay down. And if I was on the phone, I was laying down. If I was eating, I was laying down. And grandchildren would come, and it was tough because I had just had a young grandchild, and it was a boy, and boys are really tough. And I just remember uh, him sitting on the sofa with me, and I wanted to hold him, and he was just bumping back and forth. And lo and behold, I didn't want to say much. And then after I couldn't take it anymore, I was huffing and puffing, trying to get some air. I told my daughter to dial 911. And I told them my whole story history because in 2014, I was diagnosed with CHF, congestive heart failure. I didn't quite know what it was. I just thought it was some alphabets, letters, and people with, my doctors, they just said CHF. And so I started getting treatment in the Woodlands behind it and in Houston behind it. And uh, my percentage was at 23% at that time. But over the years, I didn't understand quite medication. And I would take it, but, it just seemed to go lower and lower as the doctors would tell me in the Woodlands. And so that's how I got to the 6%, maybe. It was way under 23 and way under, around 10, 11, somewhere in that vicinity. And so lo and behold, when I want to say the Lord spoke to me and I believe that the Lord had healed me. And he said, take up my sick bed and walk. And that's how I was able to walk out. And I was fine because they had found, this is an important part of the story. There, they had found, I was getting my whole heart transplant. And what ended up happening is that they said, "Miss, one more thing to do. We think we see something in your throat." And they came back and I woke up that morning and my throat had been slapped. They said, "We got good news, bad news." And the good news, I said, all news is great news. So the good news was, the bad news was I had cancer in my throat. The good news was they got it all out. You have 5 years to wait. So, I just thought, oh my word, God's going to heal me. It's either natural or supernatural. For my transplant, my life and health was wow, it was probably almost non-existent. I had a hard time, just with movement and doing things with my family, and just literally just walking to the mailbox or just walking for food or even sleeping. That was very hard. I had to sleep with my air conditioned 50 plus to breathe, and I had to sit up to breathe, and it was just difficult. And my husband was right there, and one of the things that why I decided to get that heart transplant is because prior I was denied because I had cancer for five, and so they said you couldn't get a heart transplant for 5 years. So then the Holy Spirit told me to go to dial 911, and we get over there, and I told them my story, and then they said that I was surprised because I told them that I was ready to get the heart transplant. I had the cancer in my throat, but they got it all out. And the surprisement was, today is your blessed day because the best kind of cancer to have is throat cancer, and they got it all out. So you can have anything you want. And I said, I want to take the heart transplant. So of course and then they transferred me over with a host of doctors I absolutely love, and the journey began there. The most challenging part of my transplant journey was when I experienced, I guess, the surprise that I could get a heart transplant right after, even though it wasn't 5 years. And then when they brought me in, I had several challenges on the journey because I coached volleyball and I was always athletic. And they told me one of the first things I needed to do was be able to go around that nurse's station without complications or without sitting down. And my goal was to do it the first day. And and so I had a PT. I can't say his name, but he was so good. And he said, "It's okay, Miss O. We got a time to get this done." And so that was one of the challenges for that. And praise God, I got it done. The second thing was medication. Oh my word. I didn't take anything since I've been little. I tell you, Tylenol and Pepto-Bismol solved everything. So here I am trying to understand microventilate. or Embarcus, or just all these different drugs. And now, so I was really concerned about that. And then when I found out the cost, oh my word, that was really big. So it was big on the financial part of it. And I didn't understand rejection, and because I knew that this was my heart. God picked it out and it was inside of me. And so I didn't treat it like it was somebody else because he handpicked it out, but I was very grateful to the person. And I was going to do the best that I could with that heart. And I just one thing after another, and just so excited now that back then you look at that journey and you just kind of think about complications, but now all those things that you thought about, it was already taken care of. Now I want to talk to you about what helped me stay strong and hopeful while waiting. Here it is, the cross. I believe in Jesus Christ. And I believe everything they said is true. And, whether it was dealing with people that were coming in and out, the doctors, whatever, I prayed. I prayed without ceasing. I prayed when I was walking. I prayed when I was lying down. I prayed when I woke up. And I accessed the chaplain. They all came in. And, this room was going to be a room of encouragement and of love. And, the gift that I was getting. And so I was so excited about it. My channel, I was so grateful because what helped me is you guys have that channel. I think it's 91. It's an inspirational channel. You have the chaplaincy channel. So I accessed everything that I could. Of course, I got art from one of the art coaches here. I got the music coming in from one of the top music people here. I even wrote a song in the process. I was just bubbling with joy because I knew that God was going to turn this heart from stone into flesh, and I was excited about it. So that's what got me through my journey. Jesus Christ. I couldn't have made it without him. And I'm here to testify that every single day, I thank God for every single person that he put in my life, for the physicians, for the custodial workers, for the food that was nourishment for my body. And that, even being able to come back and give back. I am so excited about, being with grateful hearts and singing and uplifting the people that helped me, one of the hardest journeys was taking the medication. At one particular point, I was swallowing 23 pills, but I did it with grace, and I knew that it was going to help me. So I'm thanking, God for the strength. That's where my help cometh from. I want to talk to you about since my surgery to get well and to stay healthy. Some of the things that I had to do that was taken after the post-transplant, some of the habits and the routines I had to change was habits of just, I prayed day and night and day. I was just grateful. And so I had to learn to get some sleep. I still get up at 3, but I go to bed at 9. And, I had to learn to have routines, make sure dinner was good, but make sure I ate healthy, no outside foods. I had support from the church. I had support from ministry. I took many classes. I became a doctor, HC, and of course, a chaplain. So I go and give back. But one of the hardest adjustments I had to make was, again, the medication. I only took since I was little and up, and I trained my kids the same way, which I have a daughter that's a naturopathic in medicine, and she came down. But I trained them on the same thing I was trained on, Pepto-Bismol and Tylenol. It cured everything. But here I am taking anti-rejection medication. So I needed to know. I needed to have that every day. There was something for the cancer that I had that I needed to take the levothyroxine at a certain time every time. And I could not, everything complemented each other. So those pills are very, very important. And if you don't understand it, I had great doctors. They were so good with me. I thought the pharmacist was going to let me go. But, my doctors, they were so supportive. And, I just could look in the Bible and see the fruits of every doctor, whether it was faith, love, joy, peace. It was just, this hospital is so good. Thank you so much. Now I want to talk to you. When I received the call and I learned that a match had been found, I think my transplant person came down and they got to be ready for tomorrow. And I said, I stay ready. I was just ready. But I went into prayer. Like I told you, that was what gave me hope. And I said, Lord, I ask you to pick out my heart. And so if this is not it, then I need you to cancel it. And I'll wait, because I had patience. It's one of the things you have to be in here. And I just remember the gentleman, he called my husband and he told him, and he was going to meet us here at 1 o'clock, and all that Astroworld stuff came on. There were hearts all over the place, and I called him that day, and he said to me, "I'm so sorry hadn't got a chance to get to you, but what is happening is we're getting a lot of different things in." And I said, "Well, it's one of those mine?" He said, "Yeah, we got some matches for you." So when he finally got down there, he was supposed to be there at 2. My husband was there at 1. My husband left because he's really on time. And what ended up happening is the guy came in, he started apologizing, he began to talk to me. And we sat down. I remember it just as if it was like a few minutes ago. We sat down at the table together. He began to tell me all the different things, and he told me about a 25-year-old that they couldn't tell you the name or anything like that. So it was about a 25-year-old heart. And so I began to pray like that. And he said, let's sign some paperwork. Let's do this. And I think he got a call from a doctor. And he said, here's this thing again. I got good news and I got bad news. And I always say all news is good news. So what ended up happening was, he tells me, he said, the good news, because he said, hold on, let me look at something. And he went outside and he looked at the monitor, whatever he was supposed to look at. And he said, I've got good news and bad news. He began to get ready to come back in. And I looked through the window and I saw all these people putting on these coats. And I said, oh my word, the man next door must be really sick. And I'm sitting there waiting patiently again. And so lo and behold, they come in and they say news and bad news. I said, all news is good news. And he began to tell me the good news is that we're going to give you your heart transplant. But the bad news is that you have COVID. And I began to think and I began to pray, and that's what I'm feeling. And I told the Lord, I said, Lord, if this is not my heart, because I said my husband's brother is a doctor, and I thought about him, and so all of a sudden the phone rung, and the doctor talked to me, and he said, so I wouldn't do that to you. And I looked up at God, and I was so happy, and I said, give that heart to the person that it's supposed to go to, and that's what I felt. I was so grateful. I was being patient, but I wanted the heart that God gave me. That was specifically for me, because it would be my heart. Now I want to talk to you about the recovery and the experience and the support that I had after I had the transplant. So the last time I talked to you, I went in, and now I'm talking to you about after I had it. And I remember being in the bed. I don't remember much, but I remember being in the bed and just laying there. And all of a sudden I could hear this song, and I could hear the doctors, and it felt like they were out the room looking at me through a window. But my husband was inside the room, and I was laying there. And so they were saying, can you hear us? And I was trying to say, yes, I'm awake, I'm here. And nothing was coming out. And so I thought, okay, what other of communication that I could tell them about? And my husband was in the room, so I could hear them. And I put up my left hand, and my husband saw it. I got to waving. And he said, yes, she's woken up. She's up and she's good. She can hear you. But even before I could hear the doctors, because I was trying to tell them, yeah, I could hear them. I could hear a song coming through, hallelujah, through my heart. Oh, glory. And, the song, oh God, it went like this. I am grateful for the things that you have done, and I'm grateful for the victories we won. I could go on and on and on about God's love, because I'm grateful, 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 just because, flowing from my heart. Oh, glory be to God. I was so happy. This heart was flowing with love, and just, I couldn't contain it, but it was just coming out. I could just hear it. I could hear the song just singing. And, I don't know if I was the only one that could hear it, but, when I tell the story, I couldn't help but say that, he is the great I am, and he did what no man could do, and he used the doctors and, wow, all the things that went into it. So again, the emotion, after the transplant, I didn't feel like I was going to be dead, or no, I was alive, and I was ready for what's to come. Next thing I want to talk to you about would be the advice I would give someone going through a transplant evaluation, or even waiting to be, and to wait to get on this journey, and what you can learn from the journey that I was on. I want to let people know who are waiting for a transplant. There are many things that you have to do. and it talks about it in James. You can not only be a hearer because you need it, and you can hear what you need to do, but there's some things you have to do. Number one, you got to go and find out where do you go to sign up for it. Secondly, you've got to, you know, be honest with all the things, and fill it out correctly. And then speak with the doctors or the panels that's going to make that decision. But you've got to be humble. You've got to, let them know because you're dealing with someone that had to lose their life and that you would gain yours. And so I tell people, and going through that, and then just talk with your doctors and ask them what number you are. Because some people stay at a 4. And if you have great insurance, which I did, I was an educator. And the good part about that is that, I got a chance to retire early, but I wasn't there long enough. I was there 15 years, and they found a way to pay for the heart transplant. I don't get, much money for, I don't get maybe less than $300 a month, but they pay for my heart transplant. And I'm here talking to you and being able to talk to many people about it. So again, uh, you know, get a good understanding. God saying all things get a good understanding. Get a good understanding from the doctors because this is their profession. They can explain everything. We're not doctors. We're recipients. And we need to know the knowledge. So we need to humble ourselves. We need to study. Study because you need to know the medications. I had to learn all those names. I had to learn what they did. And I'm sure, there's no such thing as a stupid question because I'm sure I asked quite a bit, and stuff. But my doctors were so supportive. They had all the information. The nurses were great. The custodians, I didn't get any bacterial things because the people here were cleaning up very well. And, I just say what I learned from the journey is that what brought me through it was my relationship with Christ. That's important. You don't have to go to church, but he say don't forsake the assembly of God. You don't have to, you should pray every day, but open up the portals and know who he is because he knows who you are and he wishes for none not to perish. So again, have that relationship with God because that's the hope. That's why we're here. That's your purpose for going forth and giving back and letting everybody know the good news. Use your lips to testify, doing your medications. Even when you think you're not going to get through it, there were times where, whether it was custodians, whoever, somebody would call me and people would say, hey, don't I know you? They knew my voice and I would smile because I was there. And they would put the phone up to that person and I would pray because that was the number one thing. I knew that God could do it. He can do what no man could do. So that I'm grateful. And that's what sustained me through my journey, the support of the church. Don't forsake the assembly of God and just people, your family, they were there. So that's it. Just that's my journey. I love you.